Welcome to the Brainiate Show, where we talk about all things Salesforce, sharing the coolest features, solutions, and best practices to turn you into a Salesforce rock star. Here's your host, former attorney turned Salesforce consultant and trainer, David Giller.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Brainiate Show Live, and I am joined here today by Michael Farrington. Michael is a legend in the Salesforce ecosystem. For those of you who don't know him, I'm going to let Michael introduce himself.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fun already. I'm super impressed with the production. I've spoken in a lot of ways, but this has to be the top, at least top three. I mean, this is impressive. So
thank you.
So I guess first off, if you
how long have you been in the Salesforce ecosystem? Who the heck are you? Why are you such a legend? Let people know a little bit. Come on, don't be shy.
That's the thing is, yeah, if you don't know who I am and I'm presenting about building a personal brand, that's problematic, okay? But I'm okay with it because if you don't know who I am, trust me, your parents are fans, okay? Because I've been doing this for about 16 years in the Salesforce ecosystem. Presented at Dreamforce over 20 times. Salesforce MVP, Hall of Fame member. I try to be humble, but then they give me titles like that and my head just like swells up, you know. But I feel like I owe something to just, personal branding, and my success has been built upon it in so many different ways that I'm gonna try to share those different ways, kind of give you some anecdotes in like a cohesive manner. and then maybe point out some other examples of people who've built a brand. One of them, just, one of them is right next to me here.
Thank you.
So I appreciate you for having me.
My pleasure. I'll be chiming in plenty. I mean, it's hard. My whole life, people have been trying to get me to shut up. It's kind of hard. So, whatever. So, for those of you who are new to my live show, basically, this is structured as 3 different segments, as you can see down below. The first segment that we're about to jump into is strategy, where we're going to focus on some strategy. And this week, the strategy is provided by Michael: how to build your personal brand to go from invisible to invincible. And yes, I do know a whole lot about the topic. I can also talk about it forever, but I'm going to try to make sure Michael's got the spotlight, the stage for today. The next segment that we're going to focus on, which is the Show Me, where we're looking at something on a screen in Salesforce. Michael knows a whole lot besides personal branding. He knows a whole lot about Salesforce. And he's going to show us some magic as it relates to some really cool formula field, I'll call it trickery, that he's going to show us how to do. The last segment is open Q&A. So at any point, whether it's on something that we are talking about or something that Michael is showing or on something else that's Salesforce related, feel free to use the comments below and just start your question with the letter Q, so we know that you're actually talking to us and not responding to somebody else's comment. And in the last segment, we're going to just open it up to anyone's questions that you might have. So without further ado, Michael, you ready to jump into the first segment? We're going to do that?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's segue over.
Yeah, I mean,
all right, Michael, it's all yours.
I'm sure we'll probably have some good questions, but this is probably going to be my favorite part of the talk. So, okay, so personal branding. I feel like to a certain extent, I feel bad when certain terms get overused or even just used for long enough time that people get a little bit sick of hearing them and they turn into kind of like a buzzword that they don't care about. And personal branding might fall into that bucket, but that's unfortunate if it does, because to me, building a personal brand is there's really like 2 tenets, or I want to call them pillars, but I guess you really need like 3 pillars to be strong. So we're not going to call them pillars, but there's really 2 sides to personal branding in my opinion. The first is hard work and expertise, and the other side of that is personality. And the interesting thing is that you can build up your brand with either one. So you could have a personal brand that's built entirely of one or the other. That's not recommended, but you can do it. And together, it's like one of those things where the total is greater than the sum of the parts. And
I'm going to just jump in real quick. On the point that you're making right now, I think it was maybe Grant Cardone who talked about this, and as it relates to personal branding. And for those of you who don't know who Grant Cardone is, don't worry about that. And essentially, he said, if you want to see like a rock star as it relates to personal branding, look at the Kardashians. And by the way, I'm not personally a fan of the Kardashians. That's a whole other story. But to Michael's point, you could be based on expertise, on experience, on knowledge that you have. And then there's just the personality aspect. And the Kardashians have turned themselves into freaking millionaires just on the personality aspect, because when you ask anyone, what area of expertise do they have? What is based on what substance are they so highly regarded that when one of the Kardashians changed their hairstyle or has some wacky outfit, that it makes the cover of all of the news? And most people struggle to come up with anything where there's real substance. Yet they have taken it to an extreme as it relates to simply personality, having whatever kind of outrageous or extrovert or totally out there kind of personality.
Yep, that's it. And you can have that extreme where you just say, okay, I'm going to be some crazy personality. I'm going to make a lot of, they call it hype, right? Like if you're, like Marilyn Manson comes to mind, right? It's like he was tearing up pages out of the Bible and doing things kind of trying to get a lot of attention. But if you think about it, and I'm sorry if I'm offending people out there, I've been to Marilyn Manson concert. Like, I'm not super impressed with the music, and I think a lot of people are like, yeah, as an artist, just kind of so-so, but as a character, as somebody who put themselves in the limelight very early on and was like going on the Phil Donahue show and whatever else, um, that I mean, that's kind of what that looks like, right? And so, you these two examples that we've thrown out already, it's like, okay, you can see why you might frown upon only building your brand on that side of the coin. You don't want to do that, but rather you want to have some combination of the two. So for me personally, my combination is this. I did hard work and expertise like in the Salesforce community by saying, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to work hard as an admin. I'm going to try to learn all the things. And then on like nights and weekends, I would go and build AppExchange apps. And hopefully that's one of the reasons that some people know me is because I built Field Trip, Dragon Roll, and some others. And so at one point, I can't say it anymore, but at one point, 1% of all AppExchange installs that were happening on any given day were apps that I designed and developed. And so I was doing the work of like putting in the time, but then on the other side of it, and that might have been good enough, right, to get me a lot of maybe people would take notice and all that. But then on the other side of it, I was saying, okay, I'm also going to go on nights and weekends, and I'm going to make some comedy videos, YouTube comedy videos like managing your girlfriends in Salesforce, right? That or why Salesforce admins drink, and these different videos that I put out there. This, like, to put it in context, at the time, this was like I was going into an office that was still legit business casual, and it was, and my hair. This was like that was the first time I grew out my hair, by the way, and I remember coworkers actually saying to me like, whoa, what are you doing? You can't grow out your hair. Like, you work in an office. Like, you need to look good. You need to have your shoes shined and all that. And and meanwhile, I'm doing these like off color comedy videos and putting them on the internet. People kind of thought I was crazy, but it was really that other side of that coin of like, okay, I'm putting in work. People at Salesforce were starting to notice, my apps and other, blog posts. I was answering a lot of questions on the developer forums at the time, and then on the other side of it, it was like, okay, this crazy guy. When I first started, I had long hair, and then for a while I did the short hair thing with the white jacket and the cigar. So I was always doing these little things, throwing cigar parties at Dreamforce that made my personality a little bit more memorable, or at least kind of gave me a hook. I hate to use that word, but that's what it is. It's like, what the hook going to be, And so I had the skills and I put in the work, and you add that to like the personality. And like, I don't mind talking about myself, but what about others? I find so many examples of that around the community. And it's like we could just start with the most obvious one, right? Whenever I'm at Dreamforce and I attempt to walk around with Steve Mo, it's like hard to get anywhere because people are stopping to like ask for like a picture, or they just want to thank him and say, I owe you a beer, and that kind of thing. And Steve Mo is a perfect example where it's like he puts in the time, he's an expert, and he just goes on there and answers this like insane amount of questions, right, on the boards. And so he's doing that.
And he has a very unique sense of humor.
Exactly. And he's got that, like, I don't know if you've seen like those Sam Adams commercials lately, like Your Cousin from Boston, and he's got that Boston, he's got the accent, and he's got the foul mouth, and he's hilarious. Like, he legit did stand-up comedy. I don't know if you knew that, but he is a personality, and more importantly, and here's like, I guess, tip number one, maybe, if we're trying to like give this talk some structure. Tip number one is that you want to be authentic, because you can have a personality. You can just go off and say, okay, what would be cool? Okay, maybe I want to dye my hair red so that people notice me. If that's not something you would normally do, then I mean, I feel like people are going to know whether, whether I don't know if we can use foul language on this, but if you're giving them a load of bull, I'll say that. The people are going to know, and it's not going to sit well. So with me, it's funny. I accidentally kind of broke that rule with the whole cigar thing. I got started on Twitter. Really, was my first time I started really making a name was when I joined Twitter, and I'm like, okay, I just put up a picture that I had recently taken, and I just happened to be out with friends, and on a night in Vegas where I used to live, and I had a white linen jacket on and a cigar in my mouth, and I just used that as my picture when I started my Twitter account, and from that point on, it was like people started telling me on Twitter, they're like, if I see you at Dreamforce and you don't have the cigar in your mouth, I'm not going to know it's you. I'm not going to know who you are. And with the white jacket, and the same thing happens with Brian Kwong had told me the same. He's like, yeah, it's like people harass me almost about like, if I'm not wearing the wizard hat, like people aren't going to know I'm Salesforce Wizard. They're not going to connect that brand to my face. And that's a little bit like, it's kind of, once you go there, once you build that personal brand, it's like, and this is maybe tip number 2 is because consistency is key, right? If you do things, it's just like a company, right? Just, if you do things that are off brand, you can get away with it. You can morph your brand into whatever you want. It's yours. It's your personal brand. But you just have to know that the more you do that, the more like, shifting around you do, the changes you make. Like me, I'm here talking in public without a cigar, without my white jacket, and with long hair that I grew because, it's a pandemic, and what else do you do but grow hair?
So like, who are you? You don't look like the guy on Twitter.
That's right. I need some new headshots.
So I think what we called out so far is figure out what you're good at. I'm looking at my notes over here on the side. Figure out what you're good at. Identify your passions and your interests. Find a way to use those things in the workplace. Right?
That's good. Yeah, see, David is much more structured than I am. That's his personality. That's his personal brand.
And it works.
Yeah. I like to just give anecdotes. But yeah, for sure. And that's a funny thing is when you're talking about personal branding could really apply in so many different ways, right? If you were I watch fights a lot. If you were an MMA fighter, I could give you a very similar talk about personal branding and say, okay, what's the best way for you to get, big money fights, for you to, get your name out there, be heard, all that stuff. And it'd be almost identical to this talk. But if we're talking specifically about the Salesforce ecosystem and building your brand there are some very unique tips. It's like, okay, tip number 1 is to just do your own thing. Like, so, I guess like an obvious way of saying that is be a trailblazer. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times I'll hear people saying, yeah, I want to do more. I want to contribute. I want to give back. I want to be involved. And they kind of just think, okay, then I better set up a blog. And I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. If that speaks to you and that's your personality and that's something that you're interested in doing, then do that. If it's that you want to go and make off-color jokes in a YouTube video that relate to Salesforce, do that. There's no right way, or there's no wrong ways, maybe I should say. There probably are some wrong ways, but there's not a lot of wrong ways how to build your brand. And when you can find those avenues that really speak to you. Like, so David, before we started here, I told David, I'm like, you're going to do this every week, this show. You're off your rocker, man. And so it doesn't speak to me because that's a lot of work, but David, it speaks to him because he's got this cool setup. He's tech savvy, and right? Am I right?
Yeah, no, totally. And to your point, the platform doesn't matter. The frequency doesn't matter. So it can be a blog. There's absolutely nothing wrong with building your personal brand through a blog and blog articles. You know what? Salesforce Ben is a perfect example of that. It could be through a podcast. It could be simply through your involvement with social media. It could be none of the above, but your involvement with in-person Salesforce user group meetups, or something that happens at Dreamforce or World Tours, meaning Salesforce conferences at a larger scale. It could mean a whole lot of other things that none of us have even thought of before. So the channel does not matter. The frequency does not matter, so long as you're consistent about it. So long as you're actually doing it, so long as you're actually presenting to the world, or I should say to your target audience, not really to the world, because the rest of the world doesn't really matter. Once you've identified who your target audience is and you've figured out what message or messages do I want to communicate to them, and you're starting to direct it in a way, once you have that message, the format is totally irrelevant. So long as you have a camera accessible, and by the way, who does not have a smartphone with a camera accessible, it could be a picture with a caption. It could be a video of a talking head video. It could be an article that you write. You don't even have a blog. You just post it on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has the ability to create articles. So the method really does not matter so long as you're actually doing it and providing value to your target audience. But I'll shut up so you can keep going, Mike.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And I guess one thing we haven't talked about is kind of like, okay, the why, like why build a personal brand? Like, there's a lot of people who just you just want to kind of keep your head down, quietly do your work. You want to be like quietly killing it, like be good at what you do, but like I don't really care. I don't want to make noise and get out there. I guess the best way to kind of respond to that is like I'll share how a personal brand has benefited me in the past, like in my career. And that is, there was, at one point I was working at Motorola Solutions, and it was a large company, right? It was like 40,000 people, I think, at the time I was there. And we were a large sponsor of Dreamforce. And so our executives we showed up, I think there was like 50 of us there. And our executives showed up and had like this little powwow with Salesforce executives. And I wasn't invited. I wasn't in the room or anything, but my account exec said that, I guess all the Salesforce execs said to the Motorola execs, like, hey, you guys are really lucky. That's really cool that, you guys are successful on the platform because you've got that Michael Force guy. That's Michael Force is my Twitter name, by the way, in case anyone wants to follow me. You've got that Michael Force guy on your team. And the executives, the Motorola executives all kind of looked at each other like, yeah, totally. Who's that? Like, who's that guy? And so it got me immediate attention within my own company, just because of the fact that I built a brand that was visible to Salesforce, and it kind of helped me out that way. The next job that I had was being in charge of product for like a small startup, and that one I got really through like again, we're talking about the two tenets of a personal brand. That one I got mostly through just kind of word of mouth of, that people said, oh, you've got an office in Las Vegas? That Michael Force guy lives there. But on top of that, it was also the comedy videos. It was the blogging. It was the personality. Like, that's what, like, the investors actually sought me out because of that and wanted to hire me. But then the other side of the coin, like, okay, you just do hard work, you do your apps, you do whatever. In my current gig, so at Domo, love my position, love my team, and one of my team members, Kevin, was interviewing me for that job, and he didn't know me. Some other people in Domo did know me, but he didn't, and I was interviewing him. He was interviewing me, rather, and he says, so tell me about your work, like, what kind of things have you done in the past? And I was able to look him in the eye and say, I've actually designed and developed 3 apps that you're using here at Domo. And then he just is basically, it was like a moment where he's just like, okay, welcome to the team, like, what better response, right, than saying like, or saying, whatever it is, whatever ways you've contributed and all that stuff, to be able to just point to that and say, I did that, that, like, my blog post is there. I'm the top, whatever. I've got this many badges, whatever it is, right? Like, when you have that, like, ace in the hole, I mean, there's nothing better.
So, you raise an excellent point as it relates to I'll call it hard work versus the building of the personal brand, because there's not a direct, people would think I initially thought that there would be a direct correlation. You put in the hard work and the job offers will come to you. The promotions at your current place of employment will come to you. And that is not always the case. That is what I experienced myself at a couple of different jobs where put in the hard work and I was getting awards for the type of work that I was doing. And I was watching other less qualified, less competent people get promoted above me. And I was insanely frustrated by it. And I did not even understand, at the time, I did not even understand what the concept of personal brand even meant. I only stumbled on the concept of personal brand and started learning it in my efforts to find a better job because I was so frustrated with my situation that I just described a moment ago. And what I realized is that, okay, if it's not working out by just putting in the hard work, and that's not always the experience that most people have. A lot of times people do put in the hard work and they are recognized for it and they do get promoted by it from just that alone without doing anything on their personal brand. So I'm not at all knocking that by any means, but if that is not enough for you to advance your career, building of your personal brand is a way to, and initially I absolutely felt uncomfortable about it, just putting yourself out there, especially because I'm the kind of person that my whole life people have been telling me, David, shut up and sit down. So I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going against what everyone has been telling me since birth, and putting myself out there and saying, oh, look at this. I have this piece of information, or I have this experience, this knowledge that you might find helpful. And I was initially very, very reluctant to do that. But honestly, how is anyone else supposed to know, A, that you exist, or B, what's in here or what's in your past, unless you share it with them in some way? And the truth is, there are many ways to do that that don't come across as obnoxious or greedy or selfish or look at me. And honestly, even the way I see it, even today with I'll call it social media addiction that I've got, I'm not 90+% of my posts have nothing to do with me. Has to do with, here's a piece of information, or here's something that I experienced. Here's an article that I came across that was written by someone else, but I'm sharing it with you because I think you, my target audience, you might find it helpful. And that helps build, you keep doing that consistently, that helps build your personal brand on a monumental level.
Yeah, my father would be proud of the words you just said, because he's always telling me that he's like, yeah, listen, if you don't toot your own horn, like, maybe nobody does, and he would tell me that all the time. He's like, yeah, early in my career, I felt like I just assumed that, like, if I do the work and I will get recognized, like that it will be. But sometimes, you get those people in there who are better at personal branding. In other words, they've got that side where they're not afraid to put themselves out there and all this. And unfortunately, sometimes it's the people who don't work as hard that might get the promotion, because,
and we often call it brown nosing, by the way, but that's what they're doing.
So we don't want to be that. You don't want to be that person. You want to be the one that is not afraid to put their hat in the ring because you deserve it, not because you're just allowed. But I'll give one more success story. I know we probably should go on to the next segment, but so probably the ultimate success story. So shout out to Lindsay Fivecoat in the audience, who's my fiance. We met because she came to like a talk that there was actually a user group meeting where I was on a panel, and that was like the first time that we actually saw each other. And so, if I never built my brand, because I didn't ask to be part of that user group panel or anything. It was just, I was invited, I was called out. And so, it's kind of like good things happen. If you're thinking in your head, like, well, why would I do all this? I'm not sure why. What's the benefit of putting all this time? Like David is putting all this time into this awesome production. What's the benefit? What are you getting out of it? Sometimes the benefit is unclear, but down the road, you'll look back and appreciate the fact that you put in the work.
Awesome. Ready to move on to the next segment?
Yes, sir.
Alrighty. and I just screwed up my keyboard over here. Hang on one second. Let me do it this way. All right, so Michael, tell us a little bit about what you're about to show us.
Okay, I wanted to show something that's kind of quick and like I'm not gonna have to click around too much. I'm not gonna have to give too much background info. It's like simple enough in that regard, and something that would be kind of like widely applicable. So lately, for example, I've been working on CPQ. I've been working on Service Cloud. Not everybody uses those products, so I don't want to kind of stay away from anything that was too niche. But this one I think is pretty cool, and it'll just kind of, I'm going to put some things on the screen, and David, you and I can kind of talk about best practices around it. I think it'll create some good dialogue. So first is, okay, we're looking at this. Just know that my org here has been set up with a child object called child and a parent object called parent. And there's a few fields on each. The parent, it has a field called letter, which is just A, B, C, D, E, that kind of thing. And then on this child object, I'm creating a formula here, and I'm pulling in some fields from the child object and one from the parent, that letter field. And so, okay, so we've got this formula here that's somewhat basic, right? But more or less what it says is, okay, we've got a cross-object reference here. So it says, okay, the parent letter, if it's A or E, so if it's a vowel, okay, this criteria is going to kick in. Or if it's Friday, that's what this one means, this weekday. Okay, so if it's a vowel, if the parent has a vowel on it, or it's Friday, then we're going to say that's Nito, and we're going to spit out the type of the child, which could be gas, liquid, solid, or plasma. And if not, right, if the parent doesn't have an A or an E, and it's not Friday, then we're going to want to look at this indicator field, just a checkbox, and take some action there. If the checkbox is checked, then that's still kind of neat. If not, then there's no indication with a frown face. So this is our formula. And you're probably thinking like, wait, this guy, how long has this guy been doing this? He's going to show us this formula with like a little if, statement, nested if statements. The reason why I wanted to talk about this was because it calls out a lot of really important things. One is the strength of a formula field. Like I'm going to show other ways that we could solve this problem, that we could get this information on our child object, right? Namely, through Flow. But before we go to Flow, like do you think, like what part of this formula is where a formula field really shines, like really is hard to replicate other places?
I would think the ispick val, if certain values are selected, to do X versus Y, I would say that's probably the most difficult to replicate somewhere else.
Yeah, possibly. It is good. That's a good
if I'm wrong, you could say it.
You can use it. So first of all, shout out to Eric Bizar, who actually developed ispick val. And at the time, it blew our minds, by the way. Like, that's how old I am in the community. Like, just being able to use pick lists and formulas was like a new thing when I started. It's this guy right here. So when you talk about Flow and these other approaches that we're going to take, just remember this. We'll talk about it, at the end, I guess. But having like some kind of reference to time, that just kind of changes over time. That's where a formula shines. Is something that's going to change day to day or month to month, or have a reference to like, okay, what if the you want to know if the created date was some number of days ago. Formula fields are really awesome for that, as well as pulling in information off of like the user who's looking at them, because a formula field resolves and it figures out the answer when you're looking at it. So it's almost like, it's kind of like when you're doing like quantum physics, right? And like you study, anyway, I won't go into that. So that's the formula. But, oh my gosh, David, what if our requirement is that we want to store a value, right? It's the same value that you'd calculate here, but then we don't want it to change after some amount of time, or there's some criteria where we want it to like freeze and then never change again, or not change for a while, or something like that, right? You can't do that with a formula. So then you move on, and a lot of people in the past have done like a workflow rule, right? So suppose that like while the record is 30 days or fewer like days old, if we want to kind of like lock in that value. In the past, we used to say, okay, cool, let's create this workflow rule that says if created date plus 30 is greater than today, then we're good. Then we're going to run this workflow rule, and we're going to basically just, I always use the word stamp the information. So what does that mean? That means basically like, okay, you could copy that formula we already created and put that into a static field, or you could kind of do the formula right here also, right? Like in your field update. Either way is fine, but you're basically saying, okay, only run this workflow when within that certain date range, where anytime the record gets edited, it's going to update that field and paste this in there. So now, okay, so that's a really cool benefit, right? That you can do that and stamp the child, but we don't want to do it in workflow. You'd rather do it in flow. So it looks something like this, right? So you say a record triggered flow starts and then says, okay, the little decision path, like, is it 30 days young? This is kind of a thing. I don't know. If people during the Q&A have a better way, maybe I'm missing something, but I'd rather put this criteria in the record triggered flow itself. It doesn't seem like you can use like a date comparison in that record trigger, like in the entry criteria. So that's kind of a bummer, but you can still accomplish the same thing, right? And then basically you're just putting your formula in this thing instead in a resource. So like you can still see, let me grow this a little. You can still see here, it's like looking for the vowel, right? And this is where you were saying, David, it's like, okay, we can still use is_pick_val. We can still get in there, and we can actually still use this, this formula. But the problem is, this is where, like, I'm talking about like best practices, like kind of this is why I wanted to show this, is like, what is the difference between this solution and a formula field? And I don't know if you wanted to, you feel free to jump in at any time. I'm not going to touch it.
So actually, it's funny that you're bringing up something like this. And when I say this, I'm not talking about the example as a whole. I'm looking more specifically at the first two elements that you have in this flow, because a project that I'm working on right now with my team, which is when an opportunity is updated to meet specific criteria, that should sort of start a counter. So that is, let's think of it as day 0. And then what we want to do is we want to count 1 business day later, and then 4 business days after day 0, where immediately a particular email should be going out to the client. 1 business day later, a follow-up email should be going out to the client if the criteria are the same. 4 business days later, if the criteria are still the same, then another email should go out. And the way we are accomplishing that, and I'm not even sure if that's the best way, is by having a calculated formula field directly on the opportunity record, which is calculating from the moment, sort of like grabbing that timestamp from the moment the first time that this opportunity meets those criteria, put in today's date into one particular, it's just a date field, but it's the formula that's essentially popping it in, and then calculate from that date what 1 business day later is and what 4 business days later will be. And then using the flow, we're simply referencing those 2 additional fields to calculate when that date equals today, do the next thing. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on whether or not that's even, we're still in progress on this. I'm not entirely sure that that's necessarily the best way of cracking that nut, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, back, I'm like the old man, like back in my day, there used to be orange groves. No, there's like, I back in my day, that's an obvious like time-based workflow.
Right.
Example, right.
And we're trying to stay away from creating a workflow in 2021.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not good enough with flow yet to
that's
be able
fair.
To
totally fair.
How to do it. Yeah, but I feel like that's part of the solution. But also the fact that, so your formula fields are going to be a little bit better at figuring out, like, okay, how far is today away from that date? And like and the reason why, I mean, formula fields are really good at that, okay, but the because the let me just say, like, okay, the downside of this flow, to say it like from the opposite angle, the downside of this flow is that this flow is only going to run when the record is edited. So if you just happen to go and like edit on like a Friday, then it's going to take into consideration, it's going to say, oh yeah, okay, in that formula it's going to say, yeah, today's Friday, so it takes a kind of a different path, right? And then if it's not Friday, so that's where it falls short, and that's why I say that's the big advantage of the formula. However, what's the disadvantage of the formula? What's the difference between this one and, oh, what's the field update? This formula field, right? And like, why would you even create a flow? Well, the reason, the benefits of doing that, like I say, you create like a stamp field. It's not a formula, but it contains the information from a formula, and it could get there from. I mean, you could copy it over there. You could get rid of the formula altogether and just calculate it in flow and stamp that information. What's the benefit of that? The benefit is that once that you basically can't use a formula if you're doing like criteria-based sharing, or you can't use a formula if you're what are the other ones? There's another one that was good in a roll-up summary field,
Right.
right? And there's like, so there's various different, and there are others as well. But there are certain times where you just can't use a formula and you want it in just like a static field. And so when that happens, you got your flow builder. Usually you can get away with that and say, okay, cool, I want to just create this flow, and the flow is going to use a resource to figure out that formula, and then I'm going to stamp it, right? But then, so we've got kind of that settled. You've kind of seen the pros and cons of using a flow versus a formula. But then what about like a very common situation is you kind of need to take it to the next level sometimes and say, okay, what if I care a lot about this parent, right? So like if you go back to like the original formula, oops, going to that one. The original formula, if you remember, is basically saying, okay, if the parent's letter is A or E, then we're taking that into consideration, right? It's going to give us a totally different value. So what if that parent, the formula, again, this is kind of like where the formula will shine, is like these cross-object formulas, where if that changes on the parent, the formula, very next time you look at it, could be a second later, is already going to reflect that change, whereas the flow would not. And so how do you get around that? So this is the child info stamper. You can kind of look, I guess my head's in the way, but it's called child info stamper
Here,
flow.
I'll move our floating heads. Actually, when I do that, we should do like wee. So sorry.
Yeah, I was getting like seasick. And so yeah, so we've got our child info stamper flow. What if we want to solve that problem and say, all right, what if I want to recalculate this when the parent changes as well? So then, okay, you can actually solve that. This was the first time I ever even experimented trying to do this. We do this a lot in the Apex code, where you might say, okay, there's a lot of automation on a certain object, and at some point you just kind of want to run that automation. You don't really have like anything you want to change on the record, but you just want to fire the automation. When you do that, you do just kind of kind of a save, and you just don't change anything. You just kind of query it, and then you just do a save, do an update, and you can actually do that in Flow. I don't know if this is best practice. I'm, like a lot of people, still experimenting and still trying to bring all my old Apex triggers and workflow into Flow, but I did find that this solution does seem to work. I don't know how well it would do if you had a ton of automation already. You might start hitting limits and things. But if you don't, and it's simple enough to say, okay, this flow is going to run on the parent object, and say, okay, I call it the child non-update update. And it basically says, okay, anytime that anytime a record is updated, and I thought I put in there like a condition. Yeah, so anytime the letter changes, that's what we care about, right? Because that's the only thing we're using in our formula. So when the letter changes, it's going to immediately say, fetch the children, right? Where their parent is this parent that's being changed, and just do an update. Like I don't actually set any fields or anything. I just do a fetch, and then I update the children, and then that's it. And so as a result of this flow, it ends up firing the other flow. And so you've caught now two scenarios. One is if the child itself changes, and you change the indicator or you change the type, then that flow runs. If you change the parent, then this flow runs and fires that other flow on all the children. And so all the children immediately get the right formula. And so what you end up with is almost parity to that original formula field, except for like the Friday problem. And that's just if nobody happens to edit the record on a Friday, it'll have the wrong value. So that's a little bit, or could have the wrong value, I should say. And so that's problematic. And it depending on your problem you're trying to solve, maybe that's not problematic. Maybe you don't care about Friday. But I just thought it was like super interesting that I had to solve a real world problem that was very similar to this in nature. And I thought, okay, this is actually a really good thing to think through. And hopefully I've done a good job of explaining it and explain kind of like the trade-off of, okay, we've got this formula. You find yourself in a position where a formula field is great, but you want to, roll it up in a roll-up summary, or you want to use it in criteria-based sharing, or you want to, I think there's a few others, but if people can think of them.
No, I think this is great because honestly, I could think of a lot of different scenarios in a lot of different industries where we want to have a formula field that will always dynamically show the latest information up until a certain point in time. And at that point, we want to sort of like freeze, or to borrow your phrase, to timestamp that value somewhere else. And I mean, I could think of lots of scenarios having to do with, let's say, schools, and how many days has the student not been absent, or one of my employees not had an incident at work, or again, going back to schools, like a disciplinary issue that had to be addressed, where you can have, it could be a counter, it could be the latest date, whatever it might be, where you want to be able to always show the dynamically the latest value on another related record. But then at a certain point, you want to freeze it for some business use case. You want to leverage that snapshot of that information at some point in time. So I can think of a lot of different scenarios. Again, I can jump over to customer support tickets, so case records for opportunity records. You could have ongoing meetings between the sales team and the customer team, but there's something in particular that you want to grab that moment in time of what the value is to leverage it for other purposes.
Yes, you reminded me of the other really good use case for it, which is when you said snapshotting. It made me remember if you want to do field history tracking, that's where you can't track a formula. And so a lot of times people will say, well, then, okay, I'll take that value that's in there, and just anytime the record's edited, at least at that point, I can kind of capture the change if I copy it into some other field.
Yep.
I'm a minimalist. I prefer to have as few things as possible. And the thing could be anything. It's permission sets, fields, users. No, I'm just kidding. But
users who are system admins that have no experience as an admin and no training as an admin. Oh, don't get me started. I'm sorry.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So I want to have as few things as possible. So to me, like in our situation, the real world problem that we solved at Domo, I was like, okay, I don't want to have both. I don't want to have a formula field, but then also copy it into a regular field that we then track the history on and we use it for sharing. I just want to get rid of the formula altogether and just let Flow figure it out, and then put that on the record. And so that's kind of my preference, just to have one less field.
I love it. Ready to move over into open Q&A?
Geez, I'm nervous. Okay, all right.
Don't be.
The one part of the show you can never prep for.
Exactly. And at least so far, we don't have a very demanding crowd, but we do have some stuff to cover. So hang on. All right, so the first question that we have here is from Vanessa. So let me grab that question and pop it on the screen. So Vanessa's asking, as it relates to consistency in branding image, you wouldn't recommend changing your profile photos regularly?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say, I'm just trying to share my stories of how personal branding helped me. I am by no means like the authority on this. So everything, it's kind of like when you say my tweets are my own opinion, whatever. That's all you're getting here. So I apologize if you're expecting like some world-class expert. But I think that I've just been lazy and have not updated my profile picture. But I don't think there's anything wrong with updating it regularly. And in fact, with me, you could almost make the argument that like, okay, you got hair halfway down your back, like, and your picture doesn't look anything like that. That's not good, So I'm failing. But yeah, I think in my own opinion, I don't think there's any wrong frequency, right or wrong frequency of updating it. But I do kind of feel like the picture, I'm of the camp. Maybe that's an old school camp, but I'm of the camp that like the picture should have you in it. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's like a lot of people just want to put like a picture of their dog or like a picture of their kids or something, whatever it is, on various social media platforms, and that's all well and good because you have to be yourself. You want to include those sort of things, pictures of the doggo and all that stuff. I think are really cool, but you should have yourself in there as well, because it's like, but then again, maybe you don't want your face to be part of your brand, and that sounds ridiculous, but I'm really being serious because, I mean, there are so many people out there who are just, they put the focus on something else. Like even a master of personal branding, Mike Gearholt, right? He put the focus more so on the brand. Like he actually trademarked button click admin. It's just a good example of how it's really up to you what you want to focus on. So don't listen to me when I say put your face in there, but I'm going to also say put your face in there.
So I just want to follow up on your advice about having your face on there. And from a marketing perspective, particularly direct marketing, before I ever knew anything about Salesforce, actually probably before even Salesforce existed, I had a couple of different roles where I was responsible for marketing. And we're not talking about email marketing. This was before email marketing existed. We're talking about postal service, stuffing of envelopes and catalogs and things like that. So a lot of studies have been done on this over time. And people respond best, regardless of the industry, regardless of what it is that you're trying to market, whatever product or service. People respond best. Humans respond best to other humans. And when you have a picture of another face, let alone whether it's your face or a stock photo. And by the way, I am not suggesting that you use a stock photo of somebody else for your profile picture on social media or anything else. But let's say you're putting together a catalog or something that's going to go in the mail or an ad that you're going to put online. Having a human face will get far more results than if you don't have a human face, if you just have some inanimate object or a beautiful scenic photo. And they've even done tests on this where, forget even an actual photo of a human face, but a stick figure of a smiley face on the outside of an envelope results in far more opens for that envelope, where people are actually opening the envelope to even look at the contents inside. So to your point about having your profile picture online. And I totally get it why various people don't want their face out there. But for some of you might know that I've actually been a victim of, I don't know if it's technically called identity theft, because more than once people have taken my photos from Instagram and Facebook and created totally fake profiles, totally different names, so it's not technically identity theft, but taking my photos and creating other stories about who they are in different name, and usually not even English speakers, and have actually scammed people using my photos. So I totally get it. I don't want to go into that topic too much, but I totally get the reasons why people don't feel comfortable putting their face out there on social media, even if it's only for their profile picture. But to your point, you might be applying for a job. It might be a colleague. It might be a vendor that you're trying to work with. It might be a customer prospect that you're interacting with. And whether you like it or not, they will look for you online. They will look on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook to see if they can find a picture of you to get some understanding of who is this person. Why? It's not because they're necessarily being nosy. People like to connect with other people, and they're trying to learn more about you. And if you have a picture of your boat or your dog or Astro as your profile picture, you're basically putting up a brick wall. And it's an opportunity that you're missing. So I'm not trying to beat anyone over the head with it. I'm just trying to point out this is a very easy way of, by the way, this also holds true internally in your own organization. I can't tell you how many times I see Salesforce users where they don't update their own avatar in Salesforce to just put their own picture. And by the way, what I typically do with a lot of my clients, I will put the default avatar as like a scared looking emoji face. So it sort of like blares out in this like neon yellow orangey look of like a shock kind of a face. And it draws people's attention. And sometimes they'll be like, what is that? How do I get rid of it? Dude, click on that and then, oh, profile picture. Put your own profile. Boom, you're done. That's good. That's it. We have your smiling face instead of that ugly emoji. Anyway, there are a couple of other questions. We have a couple of minutes left, and let's take a look at this question from Backle. Without extensive experience in the Salesforce ecosystem other than Trailhead and being an end user, how do I gain the right kind of exposure at the beginning of your journey? Michael, you want to take this on? If not, I certainly have a lot to say on it.
Yeah, I could. I mean, I could share a little bit about that. So when I'd say the first thing I really was doing that helped my personal brand was, it was before I was certified, by the way. I know there's another question for that on there, so I can kind of do two with one stone. Before I was certified, I was on the developer message boards, which I don't think are a thing anymore. Are they a thing anymore?
I don't even know.
The developer message. Back in the day, they were on like Lithium or something like that. But it was developer message boards were just a place where you could go, just like Stack Exchange or any of that, where it was like tech, it focused on the platform, on mostly on coding. And I would go there as kind of a beginner, like when I was learning how to interact with the API and how to interact with, just build SOCL statements and all that stuff, write Apex triggers. Apex was like a brand new thing at the time. And I would go onto those message boards as a total like newbie. And I found myself like finding other people's questions that I had maybe just learned like a day or two ago. And so I would be able to say, oh yeah, okay. So I started to get like to hit those boards a lot to find answers to my own questions. And then I just decided one day that I'm like, okay, I'm not going to bed. Like each night I'm going to answer one question before I go to bed. And sometimes that meant, okay, somebody asked a question. What if I don't know the answer, but I'm going to go research it and learn it for myself and then put the answer there. And so then I started doing that every night. And so that I feel like that maybe kind of answers the question. Is like the same experience that you're using to learn, you'd be surprised at how, even if you're just one ladder rung up from somebody else, you can just turn around and say, oh, hey, like I just learned this thing, check this out, And there's a lot of other people in your shoes. You can go on any platform, social media, otherwise take little videos. I saw a clip the other day. I needed to know how to do something, in Salesforce, I found this like, quote unquote, like newbie video of this person who was just on the spot was trying to solve a problem. I wish I had saved the name. I'd give him a shout out, but it was clearly somebody who had never done what they were doing before, and they're like recording, the screen and their face, almost like Twitch style, and they're putting it out there. So you can combine those two of like learning and sharing and exposure, right, to use that word.
That is an excellent point, and the Trailblazer community makes it incredibly easy to answer those kinds of questions. So if you have any kind of knowledge, even if you're first starting off, even if you have not landed your first job, but you have gone through some Salesforce training and you look at some questions that are on the Trailblazer community, to Michael's point, there will always be one person who is one page behind you, and you could be of help to that person. You don't have to have any certifications. You don't have to have X number of years experience. If you know something where you can help other people, there's always people who are looking for that kind of help. So you can absolutely do that. Let me jump into this question. Really resonates with me because I can relate to it. Michael, have you ever experienced this where a company has tried to control your content and how you would handle it?
Yes. Yeah, without naming names. It wasn't, Domo is awesome. Unless I was saying, I can't, obviously we're a public company, there's things I can't say, but other than that, there's really not a lot of rules. Nobody has come to me and said, oh, hey, you're popular on social media, can you say this or that or whatever? Like, that's never the thing. So, but I have had a bad experience where basically I would go and use, like, my michaelforce.org was my blog. There's not a lot of fresh content up there because I'm terrible at this. I've kind of passed the torch to people like David who are doing a much better job. But back when I was actually posting things, they actually did try to say, like, people I was working for at the time were trying to kind of, in a way, kind of pressure, but kind of lightly say, you should do this or that, or like, oh, you should post, this positive thing about our app, or like you should go and, whatever, like have a host your own webinar where you just talk about our stuff and whatever. And I said, or even like I'd go to user group meetings because they'd want me to talk, right? And then they would say, well, yeah, you should just basically do demos of our product when you go speak at these sessions. And I'm like, no, that's not appropriate. If you want to sponsor the meeting, then it's appropriate, But other than that, unless somebody asks you about it, you're not supposed to just go to like a show and tell at your local user group meeting and just start, doing a demo of your products. I mean, that's the term I like to use is gauche, right? It's like it's a little
End up losing
gauche,
credibility with the audience.
Yeah, and so there was pressure to do that, and I had to basically be the one to just say, no, I'm sorry. Like I know that it worked for you, but I have this blog. That's my IP. That's my intellectual property, and that's something I do on off hours without company resources. And as long as that's the case, they really should. I mean, unless you sign some crazy employment contract, there's nothing that says that they have any control over that. So.
Yep. So I'm just going to share real quick, and then we're going to wrap it up because we need to be respectful of everyone's time. So this can go in one of two opposite extremes. One, the example that Michael brought up, which is where the company is trying to tell you what to say or control that you should, in fact, say something or show something that sort of was not part of your plan, or the exact opposite, something that you planned on saying or showing, where your company is basically saying, no, we don't want you talking about that in public. We don't want others to know about that. So it can go in one of two extremes. And as a general rule, then to be brief about it, my recommendation is this. If there's something that you're doing at work and you would like to share some of the knowledge, some of the expertise, the best practices that you've gained from that work experience with the world at large, my recommendation is recreate without taking any intellectual property, but recreate the more generalized version of that use case in your own private developer sandbox and demonstrate to you. It could be a video, it could be a blog article. So you're not grabbing any screenshots. You're not including any screen sharing of any kind with anything that's related to your company. You're not sharing any screen that shows prospects or customers or deals for your company. No trade secrets of the internal processes for your company. So you need to make sure to filter out anything that's truly unique to your organization. But what you're really sharing is, here's what I've learned. Here's a tip for, let's say, keeping your data clean or building a piece of automation when, let's say, you have an opportunity and the opportunity close date is 3 days old or more, and the opportunity amount is over a certain dollar amount, and you want to be able to have the following type of alert happen or escalation rule that you want to implement. So go ahead and showcase that in a generic sense that could be applied to any organization that really has nothing to do with your place of employment. And usually when you go down that road, your place of employment really has nothing to say on it because you're sharing your own knowledge, your own experience, your own best practices without revealing any trade secrets or customer information or anything like that for your company. So that's just my own take on that. Thoughts, Michael?
Nope, I agree. Yeah, there are some other good questions here, but yeah, I guess we should have booked 2 hours. 2 hours.
I know, but I'll try to address them in the comments later on. So this way I don't have to feel that bad about it. But anyway, Michael, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone who joined us, thank you for joining us today. Make sure, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so this way you know when we're going live next. And with that, I'll wish you all goodbye and see you next time.